You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is any real mystery.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Kevin Bulmer. Thanks so much for taking some time to join me. A few things real quick before we jump into the meat of today's episode. I would love to have you on our email list. I've called it the Email VIP. I've called it the No Schedule Man Mailboat because in the No Schedule Man song it says, my email address is a mailboat in the next port town. Like a hint back to the old days of how it used to be when it was months between sending a letter and getting a letter. But I can call it whatever I want. It's an email list. And I would love to have you on board. You can find it on the upper right-hand corner at noscheduleman.com or kevinbulmer.com. My last name is Bulmer, and would be happy to have you and your friends on our email list. Thank you for that. Also, if you're looking for somebody to speak at an event coming up later in 2017 or beyond, I would be happy to hear from you and see if there's a fit for my keynote called Rise Like a Phoenix, Race Like a Turtle, which is all about illustrating how you are stronger than you think you are and you already know what you need to know even if you don't know it yet. You can find out more about that at noscheduleman.com/speaking. And please keep it in mind and don't be afraid to send that URL to somebody that's planning an event and looking for somebody to come in and talk about resilience and embracing change and things like that. Thank you for that. And speaking of URLs and web addresses, we finally got one deliberately for this podcast, or specifically for the podcast. NoScheduleman.com will take you directly to all of the archived episodes of this podcast. So when you hear one, and maybe this is an example of it that you think somebody else would benefit from hearing, pass that web address along to them, please. noschedulemanpodcast.com, and bookmark that, and you can stay up to date with all of the episodes of this show. Our guest today is Dr. Carlen Costa. She is one of Canada's most sought-after sexologists and relationship experts. Now, according to her, everyone is capable of achieving deep and meaningful, intimate relationships. Sometimes we just need inspiration to grow them. Now, whether Dr. Carlen is hosting her interactive event and workshop called Sex with Dr. Carlen on campuses all over Ontario here in Canada, or giving advice, or helping couples through private counseling, or providing the do's and don'ts of dating etiquette, or displaying the most recent trends in what she calls social sex, social media and dating, or even writing about where to take your new lover on a hot date, Dr. Carlen has had credible success in connecting people to her message, real sex, real relationships for people. That's what she calls sexy living. Now, I'd met Dr. Carlen a couple of different times. We work with some people, or at least travel in some of the same circles, but I think she'd even tell you the same as what I'll share now, that we didn't really know each other prior to this conversation. So I wasn't entirely sure what to expect going into this chat. And it turned into something a little bit different than I thought it might. And it's funny how that works out because that's happened a lot with this podcast. With No Schedule Man, it's really all about exploring the journey and the journey being destination. And this discussion with Dr. Carlen Costa really embodied that spirit. And as we got into the conversation, it really became about her journey of self-discovery and expression. And when I listened back to this conversation afterward, I thought about how it really is representative of the absolute essential need to understand how to love yourself first. If you're going to have success in any kind of meaningful relationship, whether that's a romantic partnership, or putting up with a difficult family member, or even just communicating effectively with the family members and the friends and your coworkers that you do like a lot, the first thing that you need to do is to get inside and love and understand yourself. Now, I wasn't thinking of it at the time, but I realize now that Dr. Carlen went through the whole process and gives us an incredibly helpful description of how she got in line with her own flow, to use her word, and what have been some of the ups and downs of maintaining and nurturing that path. Now, I don't think we ever specifically talked about loving yourself. But from the very first question I asked her, the conversation became about understanding and really honoring yourself at your essence and what it took for Dr. Carlen to do that. So to get back to where I started this last thought, I really wasn't sure exactly what to think about where this conversation was going to go, whether we were just going to talk about sex for an hour. We didn't do that, but we agreed, if you listen through to the end of this, that you'll hear, to do that at some future date, or just relationships. There's some of that sprinkled into this, but really what Dr. Carlen does is share just a really, I think, powerful perspective, firsthand, her experiences on choosing a path that some of the people close to her considered a little bit out of the box, maybe even taboo, perhaps even wrong, and how she knew to be able to overcome those negative voices, both external and in some cases internal with self-doubt, although, as you'll hear, she didn't seem to have a whole lot of that, at least not that she communicated in this discussion, but to stay true to that path and to really know deep at her core what that path was. I thought that was fascinating, and so regardless of whether you're interested in exploring sex or relationships further, I think that you'll really benefit from hearing what Dr. Carlen has to say. I think that she lends some incredible perspective to this podcast. Some of the key takeaways to listen for from the chat with Dr. Carlen Costa include, number one, honoring and nurturing your awareness. So right off the bat, she described a quote, heavy feeling that she had when she was exploring a certain path, but just knew instinctually that she was not on a track that she was going to be happy with later in her life if she stayed there. So the whole idea of understanding and honoring what your body and what your spirit are telling you, this is something that I was very late to the party in understanding, that I can see now, as I've talked about with different guests on this podcast, that I guess I can look back now and see that there were times where I had that heavy feeling and I just pushed it down and bulldozed through it because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. Dr. Carlen reacted differently and describes it really well. Listen for that. Number two, embracing the process of it all. Now, I like to say with no schedule, man, the journey is the destination. No plan is all part of the plan. And that means inherently that it is a process. And what I heard from Dr. Carlen, even more so than any guest that I can recall that's been on this show so far, is her describing the process of deciding, especially on a bigger issue, that she was able to, it sounds like, decide what the next micro move was going to be by taking the macro into account. In other words, really looking at the bigger picture and playing the process out in her mind, realizing that, and then being able to haul it right back down into something actionable right now that would play in to the bigger overall whole. And I think that was a really, really valuable thing that she shared. And I encourage you to listen for that and to consider how you might be able to apply that on your own journey as well. And number three, understanding and cultivating intimacy. That's a word that I know I got wrong for a lot of my adult life, and even through my first marriage. You would hear phrases like people talking about, quote, being intimate, basically referring to sex. But I've found out since then that intimacy is different than that, or at least can mean something very different than that, and not something that we should be shying away from. It's been my view that ever since that the word intimacy has been largely misunderstood. Dr. Carlen agreed with me. She said, quote, intimacy is about sharing. It's about communicating. It's about connecting. It's about bonding. It's about everything other than sex. And then she goes on to describe that in much more detail in this conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. She is a bundle of energy who is completely comfortable inside her own skin, and it was an absolute pleasure and privilege to share this time with Dr. Carlen Costa on the No Schedule Man podcast. At what point in a young woman's life does she decide sex is the way forward?
I love that. That's the best way for us to start this. You know what's funny is I didn't get into this profession thinking that this is where I was going to go. So I originally was going to go to law school. I was like pre-law. I'm at Western. I'm like doing the whole thing. I'm prepping for the LSATs. I'm like getting ready. And then I just couldn't. I couldn't move forward. I don't know what it was. I just kept getting this like heavy feeling in my body. And at that point I was like, okay, I need to figure out what's going on because this is not okay. My dad wants me to be a lawyer. My mom wants me to be a doctor. How am I going to compromise on the two? So I gave myself some space. And it's kind of hard to do that in undergrad when you're surrounded by 6 different roommates and hanging out. But I did. I gave myself some space and started the process to change the course of my life, essentially. And just kind of jumped into it.
How did you know to do that? Give yourself some space, I mean.
I think that's just something I kind of learned. I didn't, when I was that age, we didn't talk about like energy exchange and, mindfulness and consciousness. And, it was like, that was how many years ago? Like 10 plus years ago. And, 10 plus 13 years ago kind of thing. And, I just knew that I wasn't feeling happy. And I was like, okay, I'm a bit of an analytics person. I love research. I love data. I love analyzing things. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to analyze what's going on in my life. And I mean, it was a bit tumultuous. Like I've had a lot happen in my life. So I kind of have self-taught myself how to recreate my path. And when things aren't going right, I decide to go left and figuring that out. So I decided that, I looked around and kind of, you count your assets. What's that called? When you take measure of what's going on around you. And I looked around and I was like, okay, my 4 best girlfriends are on their way to law school. They're literally they're going that's going to happen. And they're telling me about, what they hope for their life and talking to me about it. And for some reason, every time we would talk about it, I felt like I didn't fit. I knew I could always do it. I knew if I was going to be a lawyer, I would be the best lawyer that there was. I'd be ruthless. It would be great. But for some reason, anytime I pictured myself doing that job, I didn't see myself happy. And that's what I started to recognize. So that's why I gave myself space. Because every single time I envision, because I'm a visual learner. I like to see things. I like to map things out kind of before I jump into them. And sometimes I like being spontaneous. I don't know. We'll see. But every time I picture myself as a lawyer in front of the court and doing all of that, I never saw it with a smile on my face. And I took note of that. And then I started taking a second to feel how my body was feeling and how it was responding. And it just wasn't happy. So I decided halfway through undergrad, let's change it all. Why not? I'm in my early 20s. I have the rest of my life to figure this out. Why, this is the best time for me to change the course of my life.
Well, see, you're describing the experience, in my view, with a very high level of self-awareness. And you're describing it to where we are now at this point along your path, having studied sex and relationships and communication, and you just talked about energy and all these kinds of things. Mm-hmm. To give you some different context, you're talking to somebody that could now tell you felt sort of that same sense of dis-ease. Mm-hmm. And instead of going, well, let's take stock, as you put it, looked at it as you're not supposed to feel like that. Push through it and get going and be the way that you're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And then went like a couple decades before, whoa, let's take stock. You knew how to do, so it sounds like there was sort of a family connection path toward law. I was going to ask you that, why there, and you mentioned that your dad was into that. But there must have been something that equipped you at that, what I would consider relatively early age, to have that level of self-awareness to know to step back. Because I would opine that most people, maybe that's too much of a generalization, a lot of people, including yours truly, were not emotionally equipped to be able to do that in their early 20s. Mm-hmm. But you did.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm kind of a person, though. I'm always been against the grain. I've never done what people wanted me to do. I just don't have that in me. So I'm not the kind of person that just kind of, if people say it's red, I'll say, well, I mean, I think it's blue. Like, I think maybe that's where that kind of came from. And I was raised that way, though. I was raised to be my own person, even though it drove some of my family nuts. But, like, they raised me that way. And I just held on to it. I held on to that value of, if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Nobody can make you feel uncomfortable unless you make them. Like, those types of thoughts, right? Yeah. And my grandmother, I love it. My grandmother's cute little, tiny little Portuguese, tight permed woman who came to this country with nothing and raised this whole family and like my parents weren't even born here either, so like they all came over. I'm first generation here, and I always would remember my grandmother in my mind, and every time I'm feeling like uncomfortable about something or I'm feeling challenged about something, I hear her voice, and all she says is, she's like, never mind what they think, never mind what they say, never mind, right? And she would always say that, right? She'd be like, it doesn't matter, and never mind what they think. And I'm like, okay, all right, Grandma. Well, avó, but that's how you say it in Portuguese.
That's good advice. You should get T-shirts made up with that. I could see it. Anyway, that's a diversion. Take me back then to that time where you took stock and you knew that there was some vibration there that you didn't like.
Yeah.
Alarm bells were going off, and you decided to take a step back. Describe what happened next for me, if you would.
So then I decided to look at what my strengths are. I was like, okay, so if I'm going to change my life, what am I good at? Right? Essentially, right? Like, I don't want to do something that I'm not good at for the rest of my life. And there's always that pressure in that early, and when you're in high school, you start to feel that pressure. And then you get into undergrad, and they're like, every decision you make is going to impact your future, right? It wasn't the messaging of, don't worry, what you do now, you can change because, you have forever to change it. That wasn't the messaging I came up with, that I was brought up with. The messaging that, everyone told me at that time was, whatever you pick, that's what you have to do for the rest of your life. So when I'm in the middle of this, essential, crises of, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What's the rest of my life going to look like? I was like, okay, this is only the rest of your life you're thinking of. No big deal. So in order to move forward successfully and efficiently, I'm a big person of efficiency, I need to look at what my strengths are and essentially what makes me happy. And so I started looking at, okay, what are my strengths? So my strengths are, I like people. Great. I'm a people person. That huge avenue of things I can do if I'm a people person.
That really narrows it down.
Yeah.
It must have been a real relief to realize that.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay, but not only do I like working with people, am I good with people, but one step further, I like helping people. So, okay, I like helping people. So in what way do I like helping people? And then it was funny because, as I'm thinking about how is it that I like helping people, then my girlfriends would come and knock on my door. My guy friends would come and knock on my door, and they'd be crying at 3 a.m, because their hearts just got broken again. And, they had another boyfriend or girlfriend problem. And, navigating relationships when you're in your early 20s is just a nightmare. Right?
When you're in your early 20s. Because after that, just like picking one vocation for the rest of your life, Holy cow. Talk about some of those ideas that are broken. I apologize for hijacking
I love
you.
it.
Yeah, you're talking to a guy who his kids get to see their dad try to figure out how to date and navigate through a relationship in his 40s. It's awesome. You learn a lot.
You do learn a lot.
Like when your kids sit you down and they can't understand the difference between being married and being in love. You can't have one without the other, can you? Mm-hmm. In any event.
That's that.
So you were, it sounds to me like defining a need in the marketplace.
Exactly. That's what I did. I essentially was like, hold on a second. All my friends are coming to me. So I'm obviously that person, right? I'm the person that has to help them get through these relationship crises. Okay, so if I'm that person, I must be good at it. Right? I was like, okay, I must be saying something right because people keep coming to me before anybody else. So then I was like, all right, so what's a job that I can do this that I'm good at? And because I like doing this, like I really enjoy listening to people and helping them figure this stuff out and essentially eliminating the bullshit. I'm a big eliminator of the bullshit. That's just like, that's how I roll, right? And that's the one thing that people really like saying to me, because even today my friends will call me and they'll be like, I need to ask your opinion because you're the only person who's going to tell it to me straight. And I'm like, all right, I don't know if I'll be right, but I'll tell you how I see it as how it's straight. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So then that's what it was. So I was like, okay, so I can help people. People like to talk to me. That kind of sounds like I could be like a good counselor or like a therapist, right? Like that sounds like that's essentially what I would do. If people pay me to tell me their problems, that sounds like a great job. I think
you'd be like Lucy from the Peanuts cartoons, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hang a sign in a nickel jar and you're all set.
Absolutely. And you picture it and away we go, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I was like, okay, so if I'm going to be a therapist, what is the most fun type of therapist? Because I was like, if I got to do this job for the rest of my life, I'm going to pick something that like is going to be fun and is going to make me happy, and then I'm going to love to talk about and research and investigate and do for the rest of my life, because that was the messaging I got, right? Mm-hmm. Pick something that you're going to be happy to do for the rest of your life. So then, I'm looking through and I'm like, ugh, I don't want to work with kids. It's just, my heart is too soft, right? Like I'm a mama bear. I'm a fierce mama bear. I'm a fierce auntie bear. I don't have kids, but like the kids in my life, I am fiercely protective of them. And so when I picture myself working with kids, I was like, I can't, like, they're great. And at that point, I really didn't have much patience for children either, to be honest, right?
Sure.
Fiercely protective of them, not a lot of patience for them yet. So it's like, no kids. I can't do that. And I was like, okay, so then adults. I have to work with adults. I was like, what is the most interesting way? And then Sex with Sue Johansson was Sunday night. Sunday Night with Sue was like the big thing at the time. So Sunday nights, I'm watching it, and I remember watching it and looking at it, and then all of a sudden it just clicked. Like all of a sudden I was like, her. I want to do her job. I could totally do her job. And then I realized I was watching Sex with Sue. There's this really great UK sexpert. Her name's Tracy Cox. She was wonderful. And I remember watching her, and she just like had this embodiment of like femininity. That's a hard word to say. Just say that.
I know what you meant. Yep.
Femininity.
I'm going to tap out of that one and let you handle it.
Thank you.
Yeah, just
well
wave
played,
at
sir.
me whenever you're done sorting it out.
Well played, sir. And I just was always like, ooh, what is the kind of woman I want to grow up to be? And it was like this whole look, and it was like this whole thing, and it clicked. It just clicked. I was like, that's it. This is what I want to do forever. So I finished my 1 BA, went on to complete more schoolwork, and now I'm here doing this, hanging out with you, having a good time.
It's interesting, to me anyway, we'll see if anyone who listening or you agree. Mm-hmm. Already we've identified, I think, a few different things that are just, how can I phrase this? Well, things like pick one thing and
do it.
Yeah. And all of the things that we think that we're just supposed to accept that are like these broken, in my opinion, ideas of how to go forward. Mm-hmm. And yet then there's this pantheon of others, and this is coming from the context of somebody who does have 2 kids and tries to be very real with them and tries to be honest with himself about when something comes up, like sex, that is absolutely for sure going to be part of your way forward, and then we don't want to talk about it. Or it's drugs or alcohol or, well, that's for these organizations to take care of in health class and whatever else. And then as parents or friends or whatever, other than people like you that will give it straight, that, when you talk about, who was the expert that you just mentioned?
Sex with Sue Johansson?
Thank you. I was thinking, racking my brain, who was it that when I was a kid that was on late at night was Dr. Ruth.
Dr. Ruth.
Yeah,
Such
and
a
it
babe.
was like, like that's, don't let your parents catch you listening to that. And it's almost like the whole thing is backwards. Let's not worry so much about what you're going to be as much as who you are, and start to work on these fundamental things that just make a person a person. And so you, if we accept even any of that little diatribe as partly true, you just sort of went smiling, diving headfirst toward the lion's roar of, I'm just going to take my great big personality and
for it.
And dive right in. This is all starting to make sense to me now. That she's got the biggest grin that I've ever seen of any of the guests on this podcast.
Yay.
How much of that idea was in your mind at that time in terms of like, oh, this is something that really needs a champion and a voice and a safe place. So I am going to dive right into that.
Well, so when I was an undergrad, I was actually also a women's studies minor also. So I was taking a lot of this like academic influence, like was in my world, right? Of like feminism and sex positivity, and like that language started to become real for me. It started to become part of my language. So then I started to notice that I'm privileged in the fact that I get to take this take these courses. I get to hang out with these brilliant women and their minds and like hang out with them. But then my roommates, who were majoring in like everything else but, right, in like English and other sciences, that wasn't part of their language. And yet they were the ones that were coming and crying to me about being unhappy in relationships, and yet I was always very clear in mine. So it was really interesting. So I noticed that there was that gap. I was like, we obviously aren't talking to women either at all or the way that they're hearing it and understanding it. And I was just like, that's what I'm going to do. Because I was like, when I'm going to be a lawyer, I wanted to save women. Like, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, like, defend women, do that type of thing, get in that whole, the VAW sector, do that type of work, which I actually ended up doing later on in my counseling career. But that was always my original thing, was I wanted to support women, support my sisters, support, the tribe, support that whole sisterhood thing. I come from a family of pretty much all women, of all very strong-minded and strong-willed women. So I had it in me to be one of those women as well, right? And, when you have a tiny little grandmother who's like the matriarch of the family, but when she talks, everybody listens on both sides of your family, right? You're like, okay, there's something to this, right? But I could feel it. I was like, we're not talking to women the way that they need to be talked to. We're not talking about the things that really are impacting us.
Like what, for instance?
This is a patriarchal society. This is a patriarchal world, right? And it was very much so. I mean, we're feeling a shift, but it was very much so 13 years ago, right? Like, just the beginning of the 2000s, end of the 90s, like there was a lot going on. But stuff like women's health, women's sexual health, women's bodies, negotiating relationships, contraception, menstruation, masturbation, like literally everything, right? And all of those things that the way that our women, as women, we process, and the way that women became catty with one another and like would fight with one another, and the way that women were being taught to be against each other, really hurt me and hurt my heart. And it was something that I recognized I wanted to be part of the change. I no longer wanted to feed that, what it was. I wanted to be part of the change. And I know that I knew and I recognized that anybody can be part of it. So why not me? Everyone's got to start from somewhere. Everybody does. Einstein started from somewhere. Gandhi started from somewhere. Mother Teresa started from somewhere. The Pope, right? I don't know why I'm going religious on this, but I am. Probably because we're talking about sex. It's all that Catholic guilt I probably have in me.
They love that stuff.
Yeah, right? But everybody started from somewhere.
Right.
When I look at the people that I looked up to, and especially the women I looked up to, and when you research people's careers and their lives and their early lives, and you see that, people are just people, right? And like celebrities and stuff, right? You're a kid. You think of like your favorite celebrity as a kid, right? And like the grandiosity you put around them, right? And like they're larger than life, and they have all this thing. And sure, they're energetically, yeah, they have all that stuff, but they were still people.
Mm-hmm. And in a lot of cases, horrifically flawed human beings as well.
Totally, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I just made a choice, and that's all it is. That's all life is. Life is just a series of choices, really.
It sounds like it was a kind of a wider view of what you just described. That I'm guessing. Well, to some extent, it's probably stayed that way and maybe even become more broad, but in another sense has narrowed its focus through the course of that path that you explored.
Yep.
Like before you were taken out to San Francisco and whatnot. How fair is that to observe?
Absolutely. Like I always knew, like once I made that decision, I was like, I'm going to be a sex therapist. That I always knew was going to be the end game, the end goal. But I knew that I had to learn certain techniques, certain styles, harness my strengths first in other sectors, and to understand broadly, the range of the world, essentially, right? Yeah.
That's really interesting, I think. You've touched on some things like communication and relationship and self-awareness, and these are all, you could take any one of those things and make that a life's work and barely even scratch the surface of it by the time they put you wherever you go next, right? Mm-hmm. So to have the vision to look at all that, I'm thinking, as kind of a whole well-rounded intellectual and emotional person, and then be able to take that context and laser it into sex therapy. See, and the reason why I'm deliberately pausing here, Carlen, to take note of that is that I wonder how much, if at all, somebody comes across your website or is introduced to you or sees your business card or whatever it might be, and then automatically jumps to a conclusion and narrows that whole vision about sex.
Yeah.
Without taking into account everything else that goes into that it represents, which I think you've touched on. Mm-hmm. What are some of those interactions like?
Like with people who...
Yeah, I mean, well, to ask it very clearly, do you get that? Or people that just automatically, they jump to a conclusion about...
About me and my work?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, goodness. Oh, I could tell you so many stories about the people I encounter in my life. Yeah, I mean, especially that, right? Like, there's some people who I encounter who meet me and they're like, oh, I mean, all you know is sex. And, like, that's it. That's all you know. And so you can just tell me how to do it right, and that's it. Like what value do you actually bring to this world, right? And it's like, okay, you're going to be fun. You know what I mean? And so I get that a lot. And then, so my interaction with the world is quite interesting because I get people that embrace what I do and how I do it, and that's really wonderful. I get people who don't really get it and don't really understand, including my own family and my own friends who are like, whoa, this is, that this is like this is not going to be easy for you. And I've had people in my life say that to me. They're like, you're looking to take on a pretty big thing here, right? And you know that a lot of people aren't going to be able to visibly be on your side about it, or that type of thing. Like you can almost imagine how many of the people in my life who I love very much who are like, I can't take a picture with you. And I can't take a picture with you because if you post it on Facebook and then you tag me in it, and then my school board sees it or my work sees it or my anything sees it, like that's not good for me and my reputation. Because I talk about sex, even though that's not all I talk about or do. And I knew that this wasn't going to be easy, right? I knew that. And I was facing resistance. I was facing resistance from men. I mean, I'm a woman in a man's world, for crying out loud. I'm always facing resistance, right? And but I mean, I'm not really one to back down.
Well, if you're not having sex, whether you're in a relationship or not, and you're not having it or having it much or having it well, it's probably not about the sex.
No. That's never where we start.
Right, and that's probably one of the key points that people just, and I can use myself as context, that you just right over the top of your head, you don't even know, right? Because you're automatically jumped to that conclusion, and you're only focused on those 3 letters put together, that you can't see the whole context that you just described that you somehow knew. I'm fascinated that you were able to do that. I got to let that go for the sake of moving the conversation along. But I think it's remarkable because it stands out as a different story among just about all others that I've heard.
Well, it's funny. Can I make I just want to make a quick point.
Yeah,
because
please.
When we look at where we are in our lives today, the one thing that I've learned is that everything in your life brings you to this point, brings you to this moment. I don't know where I learned it. I don't know how I learned it, but I did. So I am where I am today, and the experiences that I've had in my life today have led me to this moment, have led me to be who I am, and have pushed me to grow and expand and do all of these things. But I was always this person. I was always on this path. And to think otherwise is I mean, you know, kind of conceited, actually, to think otherwise, right? You know, you are meant to be where you are today. And when I decided to get into this work, and even today as you're talking and I'm thinking, I was like, what are some like fun things that brought me to be here? And, you know, growing up, I was always on student council, right? But not on student council. I was prime minister of student council.
I'm not surprised to hear that.
Like, you know what I mean? Like something like that.
I do.
From the age of, I think I first started student council in grade 4, right? Where I was like minister of the environment, and I was like, okay, what is wrong at this school? We need to start a composting program. So then I did. We started a composting program and a garden in my small town, in my school, that we never had before. And then I grew up really Catholic, really connected to my church. And, you know, on Sundays, the priest would come to our family dinners. And and it would be great because everyone would leave, and it would be me and the priest just sitting for hours. No matter which priest it was, because sometimes they cycle through, right? Especially at that time. And I would sit there, and I would just drill them. And, like, my parents at first were like, really sorry, like, and the priest were like, no, like, and actually I think that is what really changed it for me, was that I had this one priest. I had a few really wonderful priests in my life, but I remember this specific day where the priest was like, no, this is a child. They see things more clear and more pure than we ever will as adults. So this is wonderful that she's doing this. So he sat with me for hours and would come every Sunday, and we would sit. And then one day I asked him, I said, why aren't women allowed to be in this church? Because I'm sitting here and I'm engaging with you, and I'm a kid, like I'm in grade 6, I think, at this point. I was in grade 6 at this point, and I was like, why? This doesn't make sense to me. Because if you can sit here in my house and share this meal with me and talk to me about, you know, this doctrine of God and whatever, right? And all of this stuff. But now you're saying to me that I can only sit here with you, but I can't take part in it in an active way in my community. And I knew for some reason it wasn't right. So what did I do? I petitioned the church. And the first change of altar servers being allowed to be women was because I started in my small town outside of London. And our, what's it called? Area, I know there's a proper word for it, made the change first. And like I did this huge petition, like got everyone on board. And it was funny. So they were like, so do you want to be an altar server? Because then it somehow the church was like recognizing that, you know, boys didn't want to be part of this anymore. So like, let's bring in the girls. This little kid is right. Like, let's make this change. They're like, do you want to be part of it? And I remember saying and looking at all these adults who were like, okay, so you literally did this. You changed it so that women could have a more active role in your parish, which is awesome. So are you going to take part of it? And I said, no. They were like, what? And I said, it was never about me wanting to do this. It was about the fact that I saw that other women wanted to, and it wasn't fair that they couldn't. And I'm the one who at least wanted to step up and make a change for them. I don't know. It's just like, this is my life. Like, it's crazy. And then I just kept going, right? Kept doing student council, kept doing all this stuff, kept doing clubs, kept being this crazy, wacky person with a mind.
So you were fully engaged. I'll share with you if it's okay with you.
I don't know if that was interesting, but
it is. It's all really interesting, and it helps me understand a lot more about what's gone into this, forming this dynamic person that's sitting across from me with the most enormous mug of tea I've ever seen.
Yeah. A lot of honey in that tea.
We'll have to take a photo of that. This will be the 38th episode of this podcast, so we're still in its infancy, and I've done a few of them just sort of on my own. But for those where there have been guests that have, like this, told their story in as much as we can in the time that's allotted, there are two really clear paths, and one of them is in the majority, and then there's the other group that you're in. And here's what they are, is the group with more people in it, and I would consider myself part of that group, have gone along and then had some sort of what I would call hole blown through them, collapse, come to Jesus moment, whether it's health, relationship, firing, any of those kinds of things, accident, and then taken stock and gone. And sometimes it's been multiple calamities, and finally one clicks where they go, oh, we're not going to be here forever. Oh, I'm not living true to myself. And then sort of get on the path where they're following those gut feelings that you listen to in your early 20s. Yeah. Then there's the
Their
other
wake-up
group.
call.
Yeah, the other group of which I would consider you a part. That's a smaller group within this admittedly small context of podcast guests, but it's a clear pattern, I think, of those that have been a little bit more into, and each of them has been involved in student council, taken character development courses, has been through junior achievement or some sort of nurturing, kind of creative, challenging, dynamic environment. And that I don't think that people like that, like you, have necessarily been through fewer life events, but it's how you view them and how you handle them that is different, rather than those that are almost automatically, now these are my words, not yours, without even being aware of it, not being true to themselves because they're resisting their actual self, and they're more brittle. And then finally, when that domino falls, boom, it all falls apart like broken glass. Whereas somebody like yourself, it sounds to me, Carlen, like you had enough challenging but nurturing of your own essence to be in touch more with who you were from the get-go, so that when people die, people get sick, relationships change, jobs change, you're able to view that differently than somebody who's on this other trajectory that's a little bit more brittle. Does that sound at all? You're smiling big again. Because you've seen all of these people with those that you come across in your therapy work, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Totally. And it's funny because, like, I haven't had less challenge. Like you said, I have definitely not had less challenges in my life. If anything, I've had an exceptionally challenging life.
Yeah.
Which is totally for like another podcast. But I just see challenge differently.
Yep.
And I think I was taught to see challenge differently. Right. And I think it started with my family, with my grandfather, who had only great granddaughters, and was like, I got to teach somebody how to do something. Right. I have no grandsons to pass this on, so I got to teach one of the granddaughters. But it was never about being a boy or girl, or, you know what I mean? But even now, when clients come to me and they'll say to me, there's something wrong with our sex life. And that's not where we start. Right. Because that's not where the challenge starts. That's where you're at now. That's not where we begin, though, right? And because I see it, I think I just see it differently. I'm in this work because I see this work differently, I think. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Kevin?
No, I definitely think you see things differently, but in a way that I think is really, really healthy to be able to, and it illustrates to me how far we need to go, in my view. And why it's so important that we have people like you out there championing what you're doing. Let's get back onto the timeline of when you had decided to explore that path.
Yep.
And let's narrow it down a little bit more into actually getting a little bit more defined into that field of what were some of the things that you were being exposed to and the experiences that you were having. Well, when someone decides to, she's laughing at me again, decides to pursue, what's the way do I put it? Sex therapy? A sex therapist?
Therapy, yeah. So
then, like, what's school like? What other kinds of people are you meeting? What sort of things did you kind of go, whoa, I knew it was going to be a little different, but I wasn't sure that I was going to have to contend with that. What comes to mind?
Yeah, well, so first of all, I was like, okay, so I sex therapy, especially at that time, wasn't a big thing. It wasn't something that we talked about, really. It was just you had all these, like, sexperts, people who just decided that, they knew a lot about this stuff or taught themselves a lot about this stuff. So they were going to be it. Right. And I recognized that. I was like, okay, so if I want to practice with credibility in this country, I need to take first steps. So I need to be able to be registered with a credible college, right? So I'm registered with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers, right? So as a registered psychotherapist, and so I went to school and I did that. I was like, okay, so and that's the thing that, because I have a lot of people, especially students who come to me and they'll say, how did you do what you did? And I said, the first thing you have to do is bring credibility. And it's not about, because I see, especially, there's so many leaders and teachers and wonderful people in this world who don't necessarily have, like, that academic background and that that academic background behind them, right? And we're totally moving away from that, which I think is actually a good thing. But I knew that the world was going to look at something like the theme of sex, and they were going to pound me about it, right? They were just going to come at me about it and be like, what makes you the expert on this and better than a medical doctor? And I knew that I never wanted to be better than an MD, because MDs are like, they save lives in a whole other way that I have zero experience with. But I knew that that wasn't the only way that we could save lives. But I knew that I needed to be credible so that other people wouldn't just look at me and be like, she's just the funny sex person, right? Like, you hear people on the radio, it's like, Dr. Love, blah, blah, and it's just some, like, dude who smokes a lot of pot and just, like, has many partners. You know what I mean? And you're like, no, that's not what I want. I wanted to bring credibility. So I knew that I had to get registered first, and then I was going to specialize. So then that's what it is. So then I did my master's in public health, and then I did my PhD, my doctorate in human sexuality. And there was only one school in Canada, and that was L'École de Sexologie in Montreal. And two things are, I speak a few different languages, but French wasn't my forte, and Montreal's really cold. And I had never left London, because I'm born and raised in London. And I never left London. I was like, so if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going. And B, it can't be cold. I'm tired of it being cold. I'm a hot-blooded person. I need sun. I'm a summer baby, And so I did my research, and it took me to San Francisco. It was either San Francisco or Hawaii. And in the States, they had more schools, and I just kept going for it. And I just went to it and just kept doing. And then it's about coming back and then building your brand.
So that was San Francisco?
San Francisco. Yeah, I was in San Francisco for a few years, which is great.
Real quick, what was that like?
It's a great city.
For someone who's born and raised in London.
Yeah, you know what? San Francisco was wild. Like, I remember the first day, and I get off the plane, and I'm like, first of all, I'd really never been to the States before either. So I was like, is this going to be a whole new world? Oh my goodness. Like, what is America like? Right? Like, oh my goodness. So then I get off, and then I land on Polk Street, and I find my school, and I find some different restaurants, and I'm like, okay, there's a lot of pho around here, a lot of Vietnamese, Thai food. I'm going to be happy. And then I'm like, I need to go to the Castro, because if there's anywhere I'm going to be hanging out in San Francisco, it's the Castro. And the Castro, if you don't know, is like the LGBT area. And I remember walking there, and it took me like 3 hours, and I met a girl where I was staying, like, who was in my class, and she was like, let's just go explore San Francisco. And I was like, she was from Poland. So she came from Poland to go to school, and I came from Canada. And we were at least two, like, single young girls who were like, we're going to be sexologists, and, like, let's do it. And now we're in San Francisco together. Let's figure this out. And we went to the Castro, and in the middle of the Castro were these two wonderful old men sitting there naked in the middle of the city. And I looked at her, and we looked at each other, and we were like, we've come to the right place. Like, this is going to be great. And then, like, I looked down, and there's, like, beautiful rainbow flags everywhere, and there's hot cookies selling genital cookies and the best food ever. And then we go up to Haight and Ashbury, and we get up to Haight and Ashbury, and I had never been. Haight and Ashbury is very historical, San Francisco, right? Like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, like all of that, like Haight and Ashbury, like that's like hippie movement. And I get there, and there's like a festival going on, and I'm like, whoa, this is great. Like, this is like exactly like the 70s. Like, people are all like, there's music going. It was so cool. And like, San Francisco, what a trip. Let me tell you.
I'm just thinking the Genital Cookies would be a great name for a band. Or an album. Or both.
Or both?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be one of those, song, album, band trifectas. You need to have the right name to pull that off. Why come back to London then, ultimately?
Well, at the time, I was in a relationship that I wanted to continue to pursue, and my family was all here. And to be honest, I got a little scared. I was like, okay, I went into the world. Now what? I had that moment of, I went to the world and now I don't know what to do, right? Like, how do I build myself now? Because now that I've done all the requirements to get here, how do I build myself? And I find that when, you need to start from the beginning, it's good to go back to where you started sometimes. And that's why I came back to London.
What's an example of a time where you might have, even for just a moment, questioned the path?
Ooh. I used to a lot in the beginning. Now I don't. But I used to a lot in the beginning. Like, when as soon as I was done school and I came back, and making sure that, everything was well aligned, and I questioned it because, I had so many people that I loved at the time who would say to me really interesting things that really would try to break my spirit, and attempt to, and say things like, why are you even doing this? What's the point? Why is this your passion? Like, what are you trying to prove? Like, do you think that a respectable woman does and talks about what you do? What kind of image are you sharing with people? Why are you talking about these things? This isn't stuff that you talk about. And like, my family members, people that I love, my own partner at the time. And that happened in the beginning quite a bit. And now the people that I surround myself with, and who have stuck with me, and who have never faltered in their loyalty with me, or in their trust with, I am the best person who knows what I need and what I want. Those are the people who have stuck around, right? All those other people I've kind of just let go, because if they weren't, if they're not in my flow, then they're not allowed to catch my wave. Like, that's just how it goes. And that's what I decided. Because when you're hit with so much criticism, and people are just judging everything that you do and everything that you say, and you go from being this like wonderful leadership material Catholic schoolgirl to sassy sex doctor in a city like London, Ontario, that is beyond belief on the surface conservative. Mm-hmm. Right? And you're the only one doing what you're doing, and you come from this like, well-respected immigrant family, and all of this is happening, it's going to feel really hard. And you're going to feel really alone. And I know that feeling. But like I said, everything in your life brings you to where you are now. So that feeling of being alone was something that I had experience with. So I wasn't afraid of it.
You just answered the question that I was going to ask, so I'm going to ask a different one, and that's there is all of the, I'll call it academia, the credibility acquiring, as you described. looking for the right vocabulary, therapeutic, the psychotherapy related training that you need to have.
Yep.
But then there's also, I'm thinking that getting that kind of experience isn't the sort of thing that just sort of feeds you into a corporate pipeline that, I've got this degree and this thing that says I get, so I can just go and get. It's really kind of by its nature entrepreneurial, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So then you've got, it's sort of like you have two paths at once, the academic requirement and gaining all that experience and background and the credentials, knowing that you're then going to become basically an independent businesswoman so that you are almost pre-programming yourself to be an entrepreneur.
Totally.
I've got that right? Okay, so take me, if you would, Carlen, then into that. Now you've moved through all of that resistance around you. You've stayed true to your heart, which we could probably talk for an hour just on that alone. But I really would like to get into, now you, we'll call it, hang your sign.
I hang my sign.
Tell me what that's like.
So I do a few different. So like what I do essentially, right? Like what do I do? And I was like, what am I going to do with this, right?
Well, you're done schooling now, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, here you go. You said you were going to go through all this, and now you're through the tunnel. Now what?
Now what, right? And that's what's been the trip, is the now what.
Yeah.
Right? So when I came back to London, I was like, okay, I'm a sex therapist. I'm the only one in this city who's really like a sexologist. Like there's many wonderful minds here in this city and wonderful counselors who do some sex supported work, but I'm the only one who, like, from the beginning, that's how I've been trained, right? Like all of that work. Mm-hmm. So when I got back, where was I? I think I was here. No, I wasn't. I was in the VAW sector working. So I was working in the violence against women sector. That's what VAW stands for. And I had worked in a women's shelter, and then I had worked at Changing Ways as well. I was a counselor there for a few years, counseling men who exhibited abusive behaviors to their partners. So I did that. And you want to talk about intimidating? Be the only woman, a young woman in her 20s, sitting in a room with 20 men who were all court mandated because they were domestically abusive to their partners. Let me talk to you about intimidating at that moment, right? That's when you really gain some wits about you. And it's up to you whether they pass or not. Woo! There's some training right there for you.
Sounds like it.
Right? Let me tell you about that. But I was like, okay, this sector isn't what I wanted to go into. And I was kind of being pulled to do, like the sexual abuse type of support work and that type of thing. And I did a little bit of it, but it just wasn't something that I found that I was connecting myself with and really with other people with, especially when I was working with the women, right? It just never felt in my flow. So then I was like, I want to do the other stuff. I want to do the stuff that we're really also not talking about. There's a ton of wonderful people working in this sector. It's just not my bag, right? Like I'm not feeling it. So I want to do media stuff. If I'm going to be a sassy sexologist, how do I get my message out the best? How do I get it out the loudest? How do I just get it out there at all? And at the time, podcasts weren't a thing, mm-hmm. right? Podcasts weren't a thing. To have a website was a big deal. Yeah. Facebook pages weren't even around yet, right? So, but what was around was radio and cable TV. And it brought me back to that time where I was watching Sex with Susan Johansson on Sunday nights, doing TV. And I was like, all right, that's going to be the first step. If I'm going to be a leader, I need to learn how to be in front of people. So let's get a TV show. So I did. So I called up Rogers. I networked and called up Rogers, got introduced to a producer at Rogers, and was like, here's the thing. I'm a sex doctor. I just graduated, and I want to talk about this on TV. And they were they giggled. It was so funny. They're like, oh, okay, can we make this work? And I was like, we're going to make it work. I'm going to learn what you can say and the words you can't say and all of that stuff, and we're going to have real conversations, and we're going to do it. So I did. I had a Sexy Living with Dr. Carlen on Rogers TV here in London for 2 years. And it was like the top 5 most watched show. I remember that day when they called me, or I went to the station actually. They're like, we just did ratings week. And I was like, great, how was it? They were like, you're like top 3 most watched show. And I was like, really? And then my cousin would call me, and he was living in Oakville at the time, and he was like, why are you popping up on my TV screen at 11:30 at night in Oakville right now? And I was like, whoa, okay, hold on a second here. Maybe I'm all right at this. Maybe okay, all right. Let's get on that wave. Let's see how far that goes. So then I did. And now I'm here after many radio relationships, and I was on Virgin Radio doing that for a little while, and that was awesome. And Rogers TV, and now I do radio stuff all across the country, and I write. I love to write. Writing, I love to write. And so then I just started small. I just started writing for anybody who would take me. And that's what you do. You have to make some sacrifices. So I would just write for anybody who would take me. And eventually people started liking what I was reading. And now I've written for national magazines in Canada and the US. Like a lot. You can see my name in a ton of them. Right? And I mean, and now it's still evolving. I have some really big projects popping up this year that I'm really excited for. And yeah, you just kind of go.
What does the rest of your day look like?
Well, so right now I'm here. I work with Regional HIV/AIDS Connection as well. So I do a lot of work here with them. That is now also going to shift. So some days I'm at my one office in Wortley Village in my private practice, and I see my clients. And then some days I'm here at RHAC doing education and counseling and all of that good stuff. And doing the awesome not-for-profit work that is required here, right? Whether it's, emptying the dishwasher to making signs and all of that good, grassroots, awesome, authentic work that needs to happen in our community, and supporting, safe injection sites and harm reduction and all of that stuff. And then some days I'm spending, a whole Saturday answering emails and writing articles and thinking about where it is that now do I want to go. So every day is different, and that's what I like about it.
When people reach out to you for the private practice for what I'll call counseling, for sex therapy, what are the kinds of things and questions that you're getting, sort of
in London?
Overall tone? Well, for somebody new because... No, I don't want to set it up any further than that. I have an idea in my mind, and I want to see if I'm even close to correct it or not. Somebody reaches out to you. What are some of the things they're saying and asking? I'm generalizing too, but in a general sense.
Yeah, so a large majority of the people who reach out to me are women, first of all, and who are in relationships, and they say, there is something not right in my relationship. We don't talk, and we haven't had sex in a year. I need help with this, or else I'm going to leave my marriage. Okay. That's one of the things. Or I have men who will contact me and say, I love my wife and I love everything about my life, but I can't stay faithful to her. And I don't know what that's about. Or I have women who have been contacting me who are like, I don't even know what it's like to have an orgasm. Please help me. So the people who contact me are very much, I don't often get we need a little check-in. I don't often get we need a little check-in and just, I just want to make sure we're on the path. That does happen, and I love those clients. I love all my clients that come in, but I love the people who are just like, we just want to make sure that where our head's at is good, and we just need 1 or 2 sessions just to check in. And it's okay, great. Let's just do that, which is really great, really healthy for your relationship, right? But I mostly get the people who are like, we haven't had any type of intimacy. I don't even know how to communicate to my partner anymore. I don't know who I am anymore in this. Please help me. Please help us.
There's a massive amount of trust in reaching out with something that personal.
Totally.
Isn't there?
It's intimidating.
Well, that's what I'm getting to, is to get to that point. I don't even like taking my car in for service. Yeah. Right?
Right.
I'm just holding my breath. Oh, I hope it's not $500 or more.
Denial's so much easier and cheaper.
Yeah. Have you ever heard from somebody that is concerned that they like sex too much?
Oh, yeah.
And they think maybe there's something wrong with them?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally.
Really?
Actually, the most common thing that I hear with my clients here in London, because I see clients in my private practice, but then I also see people over Skype as well. So if you're not in the London area, we book a session and then I see you over Skype, which is really quite helpful as well. But the most common thing that happens is differing libidos. The most common concern is people are like, I want sex too much, they don't want it enough, or I don't want it enough and they want it too much, or I think there's something wrong with me. I must be broken because I really enjoy sex. And it's really quite interesting. And it's hard for me sometimes to not giggle at them and be like, no, honey, you're working just fine. Like everything is actually working how it's supposed to. We just need to find a balance. And whatever it is that your goal is, that's what I'm going to support you in. That's how I do my therapy. So I always have like a spiel when people come and sit down with me. So I give them the paperwork, fill out the paperwork, confidentiality, and then people sit down, they sit in front of me, and I look at them and I say, hey, you know what today is? Today is just about having a conversation, just like we much started this podcast. Mm-hmm. Today is just about having a conversation. I want to know what is going on for you. And I'm going to tell you whether or not by the end of the session I can help you or not. Because if I can't help you, then I'm going to tell you that. And I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste my time, because my time is worth money and your time is about healing, and I want to support you in your healing, whether that's with me or not. And I literally say that every single time to people. And if I can't help you, I will help you find somebody who can help you. Because I understand how intimidating this can be. I understand how coming to someone and saying, I think I'm broken, please help me, how vulnerable that makes people feel. And that's why I do all the other work, right? That's why I do my other media stuff, right? That's why I do a Wisdom Wednesday on Instagram where I post, messages about love. And then, Mondays I talk about Sex Science Monday and like talk about the science of stuff. But then Thursdays I do, Facebook Live, because I want people to see that I'm a real person and that you can relate to me. Like we can relate to one another, and that you're not broken and it's okay. And that we're all trying to just figure it out. So, just take a deep breath and come and sit on my couch and let's just have a conversation.
There's a word you brought up a few minutes ago. There's sex, and then there's the word that you brought up a few minutes ago, intimacy.
Yes.
What's the difference?
They're not the same.
I think I know that, but so that I don't hijack it and give my own soliloquy again, tell me more about what you think about those two things. Because I don't think that a lot of people view them as different.
They don't.
But I think that they're so fundamentally different, but it's very difficult to have one without the other.
Totally. Well, it's hard to conceptualize for people, right? So, and a majority of the things that I do when I'm working in therapy with people, we're not talking about sex. We're talking about intimacy is what we're talking about. Rarely do we get to the have sex part. I mean, not rarely. We always get to the sex part, but it's all about intimacy.
So what's intimacy then?
So intimacy is about sharing. It's about communicating. It's about connecting. It's about bonding, right? It's about everything other than sex. The act, really. I mean, intimacy, I think, is like the umbrella term, right? Sex just happens to be in there, right? So like holding hands is intimate. Giving a kiss to your partner when you're home from work is intimate. Sitting on the couch while you're both, touching toes and reading books together but not actually talking is intimate. Intimacy is just about sharing you, allowing yourself to feel safe and yet vulnerable at the same time with another person. That's how I see intimacy.
The idea of when you've got something, back to sort of where we started, when you're sort of in that vibration, something's uncomfortable, something's on your mind and it feels like it maybe needs to be said. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, you don't feel safe in saying it, whether it's about work or about money or about the kids or about sex or about that. When you can open up and feel safe enough to communicate that to your partner and then have it be accepted and heard, it's amazing how you can go from a feeling of terror to a feeling of complete sort of light and connectedness like that, unless you get dumped on or rejected, which is what everybody's afraid of. Right?
Totally. Everyone's afraid of rejection. Everybody is.
But that's the intimacy there, is that if you can get to where, no, I can hear you, and we've got a safe space between the two of us or the 10 of us or whatever it might be, for it not to be an attack or a judgment, but for I can express, I can't tell you, Carlen, how you made me feel, but I can express to you, Carlen, when this happens, this is how I'm reacting or how I'm feeling, and I want to communicate. There's a massive difference between the two, and it can create the intimacy, can't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and the first thing that you have to recognize is, what language are you both speaking? Because that's often why we can't connect, right? That's often why intimacy gets skewed, is because we're not speaking the same language, is what I found. Right? Is sure, we love each other, we have shared values, we're doing this, we're building this life, but we're not why am I not understanding what is happening? Like, what you're saying, why is that not processing properly, right? And that's why, going to therapy, seeing someone like me is really beneficial, right? Because they should be helping you and supporting you and figuring out what that language is. What is your shared language, right? Do you get what I'm saying with that, right?
I do. I had forgotten. Who's the guy that has the 5 love
Gary
language?
Chapman, Dr. Gary Chapman, 5 love language. If you're going to come and see me, I will tell you right now, that is the first thing that I get you to do in the first session. I say, here's the thing. Yes, I can help you, or no, I can't help you. But if I can help you and you're in a relationship with someone, the first thing I say to you is, now you have to go to the bookstore and go and buy that book, read it, do the quiz, and then come back, and then we can start.
Well, and then the next part of it too, at least in my experience, this was huge, was not only just understanding that language, but understanding that I've got my own sort of perceptual filter and you have yours. Exactly. And that I might hear you, but I was going to mention this when you were talking about the people that were close to you that were giving you, the negative feedback, and you can't, and what are you thinking, and all that I've learned decades after I wish I had, but that's really more an expression of themselves, right?
Absolutely.
Reflecting back. So in a partnership or a relationship, to understand that you're more equipped to say this than I am, but what's the one thing, especially related to guys, of don't mistake not stupidity or obliviousness for maliciousness.
Yes. Yeah, don't mistake my silence for not caring, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right? Those types of behaviors. Don't think that the wrong thing that I'm saying is because I don't care. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's our own perceptions are huge in terms of communication. Like, you're in communications, you know this, right? Like, people's perceptions are what really give fuel or fire to language, to messaging, right? To the way that we understand things. And that's always about other people, right? And that's the one thing that we forget. We take everything so personally, right? Everything's always an attack on us. We're always on the defense for some reason. And that's what I find, is that everybody, especially when you get to this point where you have to come and see me, both parties are on defense hard, right? Like, they're just like, I have to defend me and myself, but like, my offense game is strong, so I'm just going to attack you because that's part of my defensive strategy, right? So getting people to, first of all, be like, okay, hold on a second. What is the language that we're even speaking? Like, now that we're all on the same playboard or like team court, you know what I mean? Let's start playing the same game. Some people are playing tennis, some people are playing volleyball, and they're wondering why they can't play on the same court. You know what I mean? Like, we have to figure that out first. And yeah. And I mean, men and women communicate not all the time, but more often than not, very differently.
I'm just looking at the time. There are at least 2 other separate conversations that I would really like to have with you. One is a continuation of the box that we've just opened up here.
Yeah, we
just
did.
Because, and this is something that as I go forward, I'm getting more and more passionate about. If we teach ourselves to read and Carlen, my teenage son, it pisses me off, quite frankly, when he comes home and he's got stress from you need to know where you're going to go to high school, leading into where you're going to go to university because you need to know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Are we still on that? Why don't we teach each other how to communicate as human beings? Anyway, I agree. And so that whole, what we've just touched on, I'd love to have a whole conversation just about that because I think it's so critically important, not just in romantic relationships, at the workplace, with family members, with friends. It seems so fundamental. I didn't know how to do it until I was in that one column that I described to you where, boom, the house of cards comes falling down, and it was all my ex-wife's fault, and I'm wagging my finger here to make a point until you realize, oh, wait a second, I was sort of in this too. What was my end of it? And then you start exploring these things and your world gets blown up. If you're open to it, right? If the defenses come down. The other conversation that I want to really have is about sex.
Yeah.
And because it falls into that area of one of the fundamental parts of life. Life can't exist without it.
Yeah. Yeah, it literally.
That we don't want to talk about.
We are all the result of an orgasm.
Like, ooh. And we didn't really get into that here, but we've been talking for over an hour. So, but we, no schedule, man. The journey is the destination, and no plan is all part of the plan. So now I know the journey, but I feel like with you more than any other guest we've only just barely set the table, and we haven't even started the meal yet.
Yay.
I hope I haven't let you down by not getting to some of that stuff for the listeners either. But
I like to eat all the time, so it's good.
Do you?
Yeah.
So if you're game for that, let's set those up. Maybe we'll check in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, a once a quarter with with Dr. Carlen. But before we wrap up, at least at the time of this recording, what do you see as kind of the next things on your horizon?
So the next things on my horizon, I'm really working hard on my Facebook Live shows right now on Thursday nights. Dr. Carlen Live on Thursday nights, 8 p.m. on Facebook. You can watch me, and I talk about everything sex, love, relationships, and life. So, which is huge, which is great. But that's my passion. I love being in front of the camera. I love it. So I was like, if I'm going to be in front of the camera, let's put my own lens in front of it. So I'm doing Facebook Lives, and I have a bit of a program coming out. So I can't talk too much about it, but I have a really big project launching late spring. And that's going to I think just change my work for the better. So I'm excited.
I wish you all the best of luck, and thank you so much for this. And I'm absolutely sincere. Let's give it whatever amount of time you think is appropriate.
Totally.
And then we'll come back and we'll do those if you're game.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Kevin.
You can connect with Dr. Carlen online at her website, drcarlen.com. Now that's doctor as in DR. Don't spell the whole word out. DR, and Carlen is C-A-R-L-E-N. drcarlen.com. One more time, drcarlen.com. Her blog site URL is sexwithdrcarlen.com. And on social media, if you can remember Dr. Carlen, and again, D-R-C-A-R-L-E-N, if you can remember that, you can find her in just about any social media. Facebook.com/Dr. Carlen. Twitter, she's at Dr. Carlen. Same on Instagram. Same on Pinterest. And her YouTube channel is youtube.com/sexylivingwithcarlen. Meantime, you can reach me at kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com will take you to the same place. All my social channel links are up there, as is the sign up for my email list. I hope you'll join me on this journey and add your voice to mine. And again, all the archived episodes of the No Schedule Man podcast can be found at noschedulemanpodcast.com. Thanks so much for taking some time to listen. I hope you'll join me next week on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.